Thanks for joining and being here today with us.
It's a pleasure for me, but unfortunately I can only join in the beginning because directly afterwards I'm committed to other important events. So I can participate only in the beginning. Sorry for this.
That's okay. We already started the webinar. I think we already pressed again the blue button. We will just start a small, I will share my screen for a few minutes so people are able to join. We expect around 100 people. And then I will stop the screen sharing and give the word to you, Professor Tetzlaff, for some greetings.
Okay, that's fine.
So for that time, you can also switch off your video and mute yourself. Thank you and enjoy the webinar, everyone.
Thanks.
Good luck. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the last session of the International Water Colloquium, organized by TU Dresden, University of Bonn, and UNU-FLORES. Please, Professor Tetzlaff.
Thank you very much. Dear participants, lecturers, colleagues, and friends from around the world, personally, and in my role as the Chief Officer, Technology Transfer and Internationalization at TU Dresden, I'm delighted to see this lecture series with its many participants and contributing institutions from around the globe. Because like Professor Staudinger already expressed in her address, the global challenges ahead of us can only be solved together, something particularly for the case for both water-related extremes, water scarcity, and increased flooding. When regarding, however, this lecture series and the people and institutions involved in it, I am nevertheless confident that we will master this challenge together. In the last 2 months, you have shown what it means to collaborate and to share new and innovative ideas on interdisciplinary and international setting. This is precisely the spirit we need on our ambitious and crucial path forward to tackle global challenges. A spirit that we are proud to have internationalized at TU Dresden. That is culminating in our successful way as a university of excellence. But our journey in transforming science and developing new disruptive concepts for a better, more inclusive and sustainable society does not end with this lecture or the series as a whole. In addition to the idea as a consecutive joint workshop between the participating institutions and the development of collaborative project ideas, we are striving for further lecture series on different topics, both within the United Nations University Network, a leading global education and research provider, as well as additional partners to expand our international networks and impact. Lastly, I would like to thank all of you for your inspiring and successful work and wish you all the best for our future work and cooperation. Stay healthy, please. And I wish you also a Merry Christmas and a fantastic New Year 2021. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this kind words and thanks for being here today. With these words, I would like to follow and open the session and welcome everyone to the last session of the lecture series. Before we start with presentations and an interesting dialogue, I would like to do a bit of housekeeping. So for people who are joining today via Zoom, please use the Q&A section on the bottom of your screen and put there any questions to the panelists, which we can address later in the session. And for people who are joining today via Facebook, please also add their comments below the Facebook live stream on UNU-FLORES website and UNU-FLORES Facebook website, sorry. And then we will try to address these comments later. And now I give the floor to Annabelle.
Thank you, Christina. Dear Professor Tetzlaff, thank you for your kind words. Dear audience, welcome to the second event of the Bonn Water Network. My name is Annabelle Houdré from the German Development Institute, and I'm the speaker of the network, together with my colleague Luna Barati, our co-speaker. First of all, my thanks go to the organizers for this wonderful lecture series, and especially to UNU-FLORES and Bonn University for inviting us. And my thanks go to the audience. I'm really impressed how many of you are here, especially given the current difficult circumstances of COVID-19, homeschooling, and the usual stress at the end of the year. We have over 185 registrations, and I really appreciate your interest in our event. Some of you may have followed our launch event, which was just 1 month ago, but let me say a few words on the Bonn Water Network for those who didn't. So we are a network of 7 institutions, all located in Bonn and all working on different water issues since many, many years in research, in practice, in policy advice, and in training. We are convinced that solutions to water challenges lie in collaboration. This is why we work together with our partners around the world, from high-level decision makers to local farmers and with local researchers. We believe that across countries, hierarchies and disciplines, every single actor has his or her own field of expertise that contributes to finding sustainable solutions to the water crisis. So throughout next year, we will continue holding our water lectures, but also mobilize our network for joint research or policy advice proposals, get involved in international conferences, but also extend our collaboration here in Bonn, a global sustainability hub. And the Sustainable Development Goals are definitely part of our vision of sustainable water futures here in Bonn and around the world. If you look at the large number of institutions working on development and on environment here in Bonn, from UN institutions to very local NGOs, it's obvious that almost none of their objectives can be achieved without secure and safe water. And the current COVID-19 pandemic also highlights these interdependencies. Without access to safe water, preventing the virus from further spreading and achieving goal 3 on good health and well-being is almost impossible. But now let's get started with today's exciting program. My colleague Srinivasa Srigiri will explain not only how the different SDGs are linked to water, but also how one can assess these interdependencies and draw conclusions for policy design. After this, we will have a short roundtable on these linkages with members of our network, and then of course open the floor to the public. So as Christine already said, please note your questions and Linda will help us addressing them. In case we're short of time, please do also not hesitate to contact us directly via email after the event. And now, Srini, the floor is yours. Srini, you're muted.
I did again, yeah. Okay, thank you very much, Annabelle, and also thank you to the organizers at UNU-FLORES and TU Dresden for giving us this opportunity. Okay, I'm trying to share the screen. Oh no. Oh no. What did I do?
We can see your website, not your PowerPoint. Oh,
all
yes.
Right.
Now,
okay.
yeah, looks better.
I was just trying to, okay, great.
It's in presentation mode now.
Okay.
No, it's not yet, sorry.
Okay, now.
It's not in the, can you swap the screen so we can see the full screen mode? You can see your notes. Sorry.
I'm sorry for this technical glitch, but.
I know this problem very well. If you go to the presentation mode, then there is a button in the middle. Yeah, Anzeige-Einstellungen. If you go to this, yeah, left. In the middle, Anzeigen-Einstellungen. Then you can choose two.
In the Zoom?
No, on the top of your screen, you have three things, and then in the middle, you swap the screen.
On the top, there's Taskleiste Anzeigen, and then next is Anzeigen-Einstellung. Go to this Anzeigen-Einstellung. Yeah, yes, further right.
Mehr? No. Oh no.
Otherwise, maybe we can just.
Yes.
You could just start like this, Srini,
yes,
I guess.
yes.
Just leave it like it is.
Now I see that.
Yes.
And then Bildschirm.
Duplicate.
Okay.
Yes.
That's better now? Okay. Is it? Okay. Good. Well, I'm very, very sorry for this technical glitch. And yeah, I would like to straight away start with my presentation. Yeah, and thank you for the opportunity. And yeah, this presentation is based on the joint project, joint work with DIE colleagues Ines Dombrowski, Anita Breuer, and Valentina Scheumann in the context of a BMZ supported project. Yeah, in this presentation, I will just talk about 4 topics, starting with briefly looking at the progress of SDG 6 and the interlinkages of with other SDGs, which are also dependent on water. Briefly highlight a few points on water governance challenges and what are the existing options. And looking at a concrete example of Ethiopia, and looking at how the existing governance structures are functioning to manage the interlinkages, and briefly conclude with some issues for future research. Yeah, although the lecture focuses on water as a cross-cutting element for the achievement of the 2030 agenda, it would be pertinent to start by taking a brief look at the progress on the SDG 6, which has its exclusive focus on provision of clean water and sanitation for all. Yeah, you can see that global water use has increased 6 times over the past century, and scarcity of water is increasing steadily, which currently affects about 40% of the global population. And worsening the situation is the current state of the systems of pollution control in different parts of the world, which lets 80% of the wastewater to go untreated into the natural streams of rivers or seas, etc. And yeah, according to the latest available estimates, you can see that 1/3 of the population does not have access to safe drinking water, and 40% do not have access to basic hand washing facilities. Only 60% of them have, which is proven to be a most effective means for protection from the COVID-19 infections. The situation in sub-Saharan Africa is even worse, with 75% of people lacking access to basic hand washing facilities, and the situation in overall LDCs, least developed countries, is not very different. On the other hand, we can see that water-related disasters, which majorly includes flooding, account to 70% of the overall deaths due to natural disasters. Besides the insufficient and inefficient water supply and sanitation systems, the current water crisis is also believed to be the result of lacking holistic management and governance systems for water resources. Therefore, the implementation of integrated water resources management, IWRM, at all levels is emphasized, and under SDG 6 with a dedicated target 6.5. And here we can see that according to the latest reports, IWRM still suffers from very low or medium-low implementation levels on 60% in 60% of the countries that reported in 2018, with Latin American and Caribbean and Central and Southern Asia being the worst of all countries. It is important to understand the challenges in adopting and implementing an integrated management framework for water resource, which has been around for 2 decades and is being revitalized under the 2030 agenda. So it is important to understand the reasons why it has been so difficult, so challenging to implement this important governance instrument. Just to understand, I think maybe understanding the interlinkages, because IWRM is such a holistic concept which aims at integrating different sectoral, different sectors which are based on water. It is important to understand the, how water as a central resource to which links different SDGs. Besides having a direct impact on SDG 6 that we have seen in the previous slide, water resources are also crucial for achieving other SDGs by ensuring food and energy securities, and which together with water security sustain the human settlements, which are which is also in goal 11, which is sustainable cities and communities. Further, from an ecosystem services point of view, besides the provisioning of water, energy, and food securities, the regulation and maintenance or ecosystem services of water are crucial for maintaining habitats in land and water ecosystems, and also sequester carbon and combat climate change in a sense. Water and land ecosystems are also in turn affected by the climate variability and change. Therefore, achieving the goals of climate change mitigation have a positive impact on water resources. Improved water availability and access for everyone also enable achievement of quality education and good health, especially for girls and women, because most of the drudgery of fetching water in developed less industrialized countries falls on women. Increased food security and agricultural incomes due to increased awareness, increased access to irrigation water also helps people move out of poverty. Economic growth and increased industries and infrastructure is indirectly enabled through improved water resources, and they in turn impact water resources through unsustainable production and consumption patterns, through pollution or water increased water footprint of products being consumed, produced and consumed, so to say. So there are different approaches for assessing the SDG interlinkages using different methodologies, but 2 of the recent or more popularly followed methodologies One is a qualitative assessment of goal and target interactions, which is based on expert judgments in identifying functional and causal relationships among SDGs and their targets, followed by Nielsen et al. Group and adopted also by the ICSU. And the second is more a quantitative assessment of interactions based on country and country disaggregated data on indicators, which is developed by Pradhan et al. And group. And there has been one recent assessment following both of these approaches, qualitative or quantitative methods, assessing the core water use sectors of WEF Nexus and the related SDGs and the targets by Fader et al. Which show that SDG 6, the water related SDG, has the highest number of potential synergies with the water use sectors. And of all that, the target 6.5, which focuses on governance of water, has had the most positive interaction scores with other SDG targets. Nevertheless, it is important to understand the limitation of these kinds of assessment frameworks. They highlight mostly positive or negative correlations. They highlight these correlations and strengths of these correlations, but they do not provide a necessary understanding of conditions that are behind, that are responsible for these trade-offs and synergies. So, I think it would be important to understand the challenges, of governing these interlinkages. In order to understand the governance challenges, it would be important to understand the reasons behind these trade-offs, which the frameworks currently are not capable of providing. I think looking at the challenges of water governance, a global water crisis is labeled by the UN World Water Assessment Program as one of the challenge of governance, as a crisis of governance. So this is also amply evident in if you look at the SDG target 6.5, which considers the mere presence of governance instruments as indicators. So there is also a challenge of measuring the effectiveness of these governance instruments. So there are also, the issues of scale. There has been discussion about, where should the appropriate governance system for water should be. Whether we should follow whether one should follow the hydrological boundaries or the political administrative boundaries, and there have been arguments for and against each of these different kinds of scale delineations, and also the argument that the requirement of governance at a scale, at a larger scale, is important to at least for setting the norms, because the issues of water governance range, cut across different scales from local to global. And but again, there's an argument against this scale that effective participation is only possible at a lower scale, where there are frequent face-to-face interactions and so on. So another important challenge is the complexity of property rights when it comes to water, as against property rights to land, for example. It is aptly termed as web of interests, and which make it difficult to treat water as a pure economic good, there is, and because it exhibits the property of a common pool resource, and which is which makes it impossible or probably difficult to leave the governance of water to entirely a market-based mechanism. And another important challenge is the inequity in the access to water resources. And this inequity is also not only with the access to water resources, but also with the distribution of costs and benefits of, say, for example, the water-based production and consumption activities. How this costs and benefits of such activities are distributed across different actors who are located in different reaches of a water body, of a water resource system. Web securities, which are core, which are the core water-dependent SDGs, are pursued through strategies formulated in sectors and adapted and implemented by the representatives at different levels of government. levels of governance. Yeah, so it is important, coordination, to achieve coordination across these sectors and across these different levels is required, but at the same time it is challenging. But it is important to achieve coordination, to manage the interdependencies and achieve different SDGs and related web securities. So such coordination among different decision makers across water use sectors and levels are achieved in practice by different governance mechanisms and policy instruments. Now, Paul Vostel classifies governance mechanisms based on the type of institutions, whether they are formal or informal, and the type of actors involved, whether they are state, purely state, or non-state, or a mix of different actors involved. So based on this classification, there are these three stylized mechanisms of governance, namely hierarchies, which are mostly, where formal institutions are or play an important role, and only state actors are involved in these kinds of governance mechanisms, and markets which involve non-state actors and also are influenced by formal and informal formal and informal institutions. So in most of the less industrialized countries where provision of services is organized by public sector, under the public sector, hierarchical mechanisms are devised to achieve multi-sector and multi-level coordination. As following the initiatives over the last few decades on decentralization of natural resource management, one could also observe networks based on principles of cooperation, which can be commonly observed in different parts of the world for provision of these services. And there are also calls for synergistic combinations of different modes of governance, as it is becoming clearer and clearer that no single mode of governance is alone sufficient to achieve the required horizontal and vertical coordination. Yeah. So with this brief background, I think I would just look at a concrete, take you to the concrete example of assessing the governance of interlinkages in Awash Basin in Ethiopia, which is conducted jointly with the co-authors, with the co-researchers at TIE, whom I mentioned earlier. Yeah, here we look at the Awash Basin, and looking at the main questions pursued in this research are, how are the existing governance mechanisms, how effective are they in managing these interdependencies, and what are the conditions that affect this horizontal and vertical coordination in this case. Yeah, so it is the case study, which was part of 4-country study. And besides physical water scarcity as a result of high intra and interannual variability of rainfall and water availability, scarcity is also resulting from limited storage capacity in the basin and from ineffective management of water storage and irrigation infrastructure. This results in very high competition over available water and land in the basin. So the key questions are pursued in this context are, as I mentioned earlier, and looking at the water conflicts, the conflicts of water and land in this basin, we can see that in Awash Basin, they can, the goal conflicts are manifested in the conflicts over land and water resource use among different user groups. Conflicts of use of land and water in the basin, especially between, large scale state and private farms, which benefit from medium and large irrigation schemes, and smallholder farmers and pastoralists who have subsistence livelihoods benefiting from community and small-scale irrigation schemes. Pastoralists are further alienated due to conservation, due to ecological conservations from the conservation zones, and they're further moved to the periphery of these conservation zones. And another noteworthy development in this context is the land expropriations and change from rain-fed rangelands to commercial large-scale irrigated agriculture, which is seen as a key thrust area for economic growth by the national planners. And other industrial, domestic, and electricity generation users of water exert competitions on the already scarce water resources. So coordination among different users poses a challenge. And to analyze here we can see in these pictures, a resettled pastoralist and with this defunct irrigation system, and here, which is the conservation zone, which is the Awash National Park, and this is one of the sugar plantation factory recreational zone, which receives equal amount of water. These pictures represent the unequal distribution of the resource and alienation of the resources from the local communities, and presents the conflict which is there in the present context. So to understand the interrelations between different action situations, we apply an analytical tool which is based on the institutional analysis and development framework by Elinor Ostrom, and the concept of network of action situations, adjacent action situations by McInnes, which is an extension to this IAD framework. We first start, here we conceptualize that water and land use decisions and take place and are affected by action situations, different decision centers. Here we start by identifying the focal action situation based on the empirical context and the research question, which is usually where the water and land users make competing resource use decisions, which lead to operational outcomes which are related to the resource condition, socioeconomic well-being, etc. And besides these operational outcomes, action situations, or for example, local water use management committees, they design rules. These outcomes of these action situations, which are in the form of rules, also affect the choices and the focal action situation. Choices of actors within this situation. There could also be other action situations which result in changing the resource condition, which also in turn affect the choices of actors within the focal action situation. So the entire action situation in the networks actions in this different network of action situations is affected by external context, which are, for example, the resource characteristics, rules in use, and community attributes, and for example, the power structures, the political economy factors, and the constructs of problems and so on. So I would directly jump into the key findings of the result based on the analysis using this framework. We find that, with respect to coordination mechanisms in Ethiopia, there's a, hierarchical implementation of path-dependent, centrally designed strategies, which is prevalent in the context. They are basically following the existing strategies, which is the growth and transformation plan, which is based on the growth and transformation plan, which are biased towards achieving economic growth and against the achievement of social equity and environmental objectives. One of the key policy instrument, which is the environment impact assessment, is found to be ineffective and is not well integrated into the sectors of relevance. And multi-stakeholder platforms like IWRM, which Ethiopia adopted quite early on in the early 2000s, was found to be rather ineffective. In terms of effectiveness in progressing towards the 2030 agenda, several principles of the agenda were not seen to be guiding the existing strategies. For example, the current strategies with an economic growth rationale were attracting investments that are continuing to alienate smallholders and pastoralists from their rights to land and water. As a result of low synergies among policies, limited coordination was seen vertically or horizontally. This is leading to strong trade-offs across among different SDGs. The process of designing and implementing strategies for development and use of water and land in the basin did not include the lower levels of governance and other non-state actors, which is which is probably the characteristic of the autocratic style of regime that is in place currently in the country. Key factors that are affecting the resource use and coordination were found to be low capacities at the lower levels of administration and also at the level of water user association, which did not match with the responsibilities they are, as outlined in the in the constitutions of these water user associations. And yeah, and they also, you know, the low and ineffective participation in the based on the current political system, which resembles the autocratic regime, which is you know, the strategies do not match the interests and aspirations of the local populations. So based on this you know, assessments, and based on the the discussion, you know, we this is I mean, I developed a list for future research, I mean, which could be, of course, longer and different depending on how one perceives the problem. But, you know, this is a list which is, you know, not in the order of priority or sequence. But yeah, the first, the problem of interdependence, although acknowledged at higher levels, you know, is not part of the discourse at the national and subnational level. Therefore, you know, power plays an important role on which issues are prioritized. Here, for example, the economic growth issue was gained more priority than the issues of you know, social equity and environmental goals, for example. So, you know, the future research projects, you know, could also be designed towards contributing to social construction of this interdependence problem in a way that, you know, overcomes the power structures that lead to that are currently leading to trade-offs among goals. You know, issues of scale and comparability of cases is another issue due to diversity in the choice of methods and units and scale of analysis. Comparability across contexts is a challenge that needs to be addressed in future research. Now, further, developing a robust set of indicators for target 6.5 on water governance, rather than, you know, simply considering the presence or absence of the governance instrument, would be more useful and more effective in implementing proper governance framework. Further, you know, translating the existing frameworks on assessment of interlinkages and making them more usable as usable tools for policy design and implementation at different levels would be, I think, also part of the future agenda for future research. Yeah, with this, I thank you all, and apologies again for the glitch and the time. And I also thank the BMZ for within which context the research is being carried out. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks a lot to you, Srini, for this very systematic overview on the linkages and trade-offs. And I think it's not easy to take any governance decisions in this context. So let me share my screen to take you to our roundtable. So we come to the roundtable where you will better understand how our different member institutions address these interdependencies, and move to concrete examples of how SDGs are interlinked, how these interdependencies can be assessed at the research level from a transdisciplinary point of view, and how researchers and policymakers can cooperate to address these interdependencies. And finally, also, of course, how climate change affects all this. So I would first give the word to Professor Dr. Marielle Evers, please, who holds the chair, the UNESCO chair on human water systems at Bonn University's Department of Geography. Dear Marielle, you are very experienced in adopting inter and transdisciplinary approaches in your research on human water systems and hydrological extremes. So could you give us one or two concrete examples why we need such approaches to understand water challenges, and how do you implement these approaches? Which disciplines do you actually mobilize?
Thank you, Annabelle, for this question. I just jump into the topic, and we just have heard a lot of challenges, and that the world is interconnected and characterized by rapid changes, uncertainties, and so on. And if you, if you go to the presentation mode, but it's okay if you also use this mode. I just want to highlight a little bit the way of inter and transdisciplinary approaches. What I do understand by transdisciplinarity, because often it's understood in different ways. So I understand the that TD combines the inner scientific cooperation between distinct disciplines as well as cooperation with practitioners from outside of the scientific world. And what we have seen, this is very important, especially when it's a representative from different fields, interests, represent different SDGs, but also with different interests. And but also for my personal reason for doing transdisciplinary research, or to start with that, was the recognition of the huge gap between scientific knowledge production and the implementation or little implementation into practice. So I started to do transdisciplinary research without knowing that it's transdisciplinary research at that time, because it was maybe 15 years ago. But there are a couple of reasons for that. Other reasons, like if you click for the reasons, you can see a couple of reasons with what I think is very important. If you just go for the research questions, I think it's very helpful to be also triggered by practitioners and partners to formulate the research questions in a way. I don't say basic research is not needed. It's both. It's inter and transdisciplinary and basic research. Improving the database and the knowledge base via integrating the experts, regional experts or other experts is of course very important. We are working in the field of ecohydrology and working a lot with ecological, with the hydrological extremes. We are working with hydrological and hydrodynamic models using good quality data for this. But often the ground truthing is very much needed. You cannot take only the databases, but you also need the actual information on the ground. This is one thing. I think even more important with TD is the joint knowledge production. So this mutual learning, that is great. And it's important also, I think for personal reasons, but especially also for the research process. And I highlighted the gap, implementation gap of scientific knowledge. Generating ownership and increase the chance of sustainable implementation, I think, is more possible if you do transdisciplinary research. Also, the idea of or the challenge with uncertainties, handling uncertainties, and enhancing decision-making capacity is probably also, or there's a great potential also to meet these challenges by inter and transdisciplinary approaches. But it's a hell of work if you do it really in a systematic way. There are also other risks. I mean, the communication, building communication bases and so on. I think Yvonne will also report on this later, on these challenges. However, you can also create expectation which are maybe not met, or the process is hijacked by persons who have another agenda and so on. So there are a couple of risks, but still. I give you two examples. We developed a framework for transdisciplinary research, which is called collaborative modeling. What we understand by collaborative modeling is the interactive and iterative process in which stakeholders' engagement and communication activities are complemented by modeling and communication tools. And this, you can see on the right side, this framework for collaborative modeling. And of course, I cannot go into detail, but just to give you an idea, we have several steps in this phases, from system definition to formulating scenarios, formulating alternatives, modeling alternatives, and the impact. And this is constantly done with the stakeholders in workshops and different formats. This we call collaborative modeling, and we developed this for Hamburg and London in the DNCM project. Sorry, the project name is wrong. You can have a look at the YouTube video. And I always wanted to do this, implement this also in an online format and to try if this works. and now we have to do it, which is not so good. And it's good, so it works quite okay. This collaborative modeling, what we are doing now in the ClimAfrique project in Togo, Benin, and the Paradis project in Ghana. You can have a look at the paper and the other papers to get more information on this. The second and last example is the multi-criteria and participatory vulnerability assessment. It's mainly developed by Mariana De Brito, who was PhD in my group, and applying the multi-criteria decision analysis methodologies also in a participatory way. The reason is, for instance, for flood risk here, flood risk management decisions may be designed without the direct participation of multiple stakeholders. However, they cannot be implemented without them. So we developed this, again, a framework for including stakeholders in different steps, like with the Delphi survey, collecting the vulnerability criteria, or with focus groups and interactive group methods, organization of an index to structure these criteria, and to apply this multi-criteria decision analysis for AHP or NLP for the elicitation of weighing of criteria. So every stakeholder has a different view on the importance of certain criteria. So for coping capacity or societal vulnerability or structural vulnerability. And so we asked everybody. And in the end, you can see in the next figure that you have a multitude of views on these different criteria. This is with the colors, you can see the importance, this respective importance or weight importance by each participants concerning the different criteria. And in the end, you can either have a joint map, then you can, by JS simulation, create a joint map with an average, or then a weight way for the vulnerability, or also these individual maps for each participants. And this gives you, inter alia, a very good information basis for further planning. And also, I think this is for itself also a mutual learning process to learn about the different views and weighing criteria. If you have, if you're interested, please have a look at these papers, and you are also invited to have a look at our publication, our website. There's the link for the website for our group, and I'm happy to discuss further. I think we lost Annabelle. He's the key person because she has the slides.
Yes.
But maybe Yvonne, you have your own slides.
I have my own slides. If I'm allowed to share, I can share.
Yes, please. I also can share the other slides later.
Annabelle was so impressed and overwhelmed by my presentation.
Yvonne, you want to go ahead, or should
Yes.
I? I can also do it.
If you have it, then just you go for it. It's better.
Good. One second. Sorry, everyone, for this. Can you see it?
With the moderation as well?
If you want to go ahead, it's fine. Yes.
Okay, just to bring a little bit into context, the idea that I was asked to speak about that we are conducting several projects in the context of disaster risk management and climate change adaptation at UNU-FLORES. And the question is where we experience SDG interlinkages and how do different stakeholders we work with perceive and address them. This is what I would like to refer to in the next 5 minutes. So many thanks for giving me the floor, and good afternoon also to everyone from my side. So as it was already introduced, the research at UNU-FLORES on water, and with this our main contribution to the Bonn Water Network, which we present here also today in this lecture, is linked to the perspective of the role of water in disaster risk, and at the same time considering global environmental change. And what we focus on is mainly on climate change as the main driver of change. So in other words, our research approach in this regard aims to better understand how too much water, such due to flooding, or too little water due to droughts, or also too much variability of water, thinking about shifting onset of rainy season, having dry seasons in the middle of rainy season, or heavy precipitation events, are a driver of disaster risk. So I think it is very obvious that disasters pose a major challenge to sustainable development in all its dimensions, and as we all currently experience at the global level with the COVID-19 pandemic, if we understand drivers of disaster risk and derive strategies for reducing it, we are achieving progress in more or less all goals of sustainable development. And this is how we see it. However, besides addressing only the SDGs, we also consider the interlinkages between other international frameworks, such as the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction you see on the bottom left side, or the Paris Agreement you see on the right side. And we see this as a kind of interconnected sphere, which are very strongly linked to achieve sustainable development. The figure in the center of the slide, the so-called Propeller Framework, derived by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, illustrates very well how UNU-FLORES approaches water-related research, namely by understanding how hazards such as floods and drought, exposure to the hazard, and the vulnerability of the exposed elements are driving the overall risk. And by understanding these three dimensions, we aim to develop targeted measures and solutions to reduce disaster risk, as examples provided also in this figure here. So we have several research projects at UNU-FLORES that are aiming to understand and reduce disaster risk in certain project regions, and to support also climate change adaptation. Examples here are on the right side, the Globe Drought Project, the Klima-Free Project, which I presented already in the second event of this lecture series. So I won't deep dive on this in this session here, the Valley Project or the Wandel Project. And the specific question on how we experience now interlinkages between specific SDGs and how different stakeholders perceive them, I would like to illustrate based on the example of the Wandel Project on the next slide, please. Next slide, thank you. So Wandel is a BMBF-funded project and stands for Water Resources as Important Factor in the Energy Transition at Local and Global Scale. And in this project, UNU-FLORES leads a case study in Brazil, where the current energy production builds predominantly on hydropower, which is in the meantime challenged very much due to consecutive drought events. In this project, UNU-FLORES works specifically on two questions. So the question one, whether restrictions on water availability will limit the use of conventional energy systems, such as hydropower, thereby accelerating the energy transition. And then the question number two is, can restrictions on water availability influence the implementation of a global energy transition? In this case study, we investigate to which degree and how the production of sugarcane can be a sustainable strategy for energy transition against the background of experiencing more dry conditions. In terms of interlinkages of SDGs, Wandel addresses in specific the SDGs 6 on water and 7 on energy. And for SDG 6, we address with this project in very specific the target 6.4 on how to increase water use efficiency, as sugarcane mills consider themselves as the water industry, because 70% of the sugarcane is water and industrial wastewater is used to irrigate sugarcane fields. And we interlink it with SDG 7, focusing specifically specifically on target 7.2 to substantially increase the share of renewable energy in the global energy mix. So sugarcane in Brazil is very important for the energy sector due to ethanol production, and electricity is rather a byproduct. And this research, we investigate the potential of sugarcane to cover part of the electricity demand during the dry season and how sustainable and resistant this energy production is against drought events. In terms of how different stakeholders we work with, perceive and address them, I would like just to mention two. The governmental level, of course. The governmental level is very interested in getting facts and figures about how can we achieve the diversification of the energy matrix. They understood and experienced the vulnerability of the current energy production, or the more monopole energy production. Another stakeholder are, for example, sugarcane mills in this specific project. They know the potential of sugarcane to cover electricity. However, not all the mills are connected to the grid to sell the electricity surplus. So I think this information will be very relevant for them in order to kind of use this, let's say, energy byproduct in a more sustainable and targeted way, let's say. So this was just a short input from my side, and I would hand over back to Annabelle, who I see is back now. Annabelle, I dare to ask the question to myself. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Yvonne. So you'll see, it's a perfect network. It even works without a moderation or any lead. It's just amazing. So let me now come to Birgit Kämmerling. Dr. Birgit Kämmerling is a researcher at the Bonn International Center for Conversion. Dear Birgit, in your work at BIC, you address the interlinkages between water and land resources in the context of high water scarcity in Morocco. So which are the specific interdependencies and challenges you look at, and which are successful ways to address them?
Yeah, thank you, Annabelle, for giving me the floor. And also from my side, good afternoon to the colleagues and the many participants interested today in the topic. I'm very happy to participate in this debate. And I will talk today about our BMBF-funded eWalama project, which Big Foam is currently part of, which is titled Sustainable Technologies and Services for Water and Land Management in Morocco. So in this project, we look at the specific interdependencies between water, land, and agriculture, as they are tackled in different SDGs, which we were already talking about in the previous presentation. So it's not only the SDG 6, clean water and sanitation, but also, of course, the SDG 2, Zero Hunger, whose aim is food security and sustainable agriculture, and SDG 15, Life on Land, which aims to protect, restore, and promote the sustainable use of land. And the necessity to look at these interdependencies of water and agriculture results from the context in the Fez-Meknes region. You see here in this map the CES plain, which is our project area within the Fez-Meknes region. And here water scarcity is closely linked to the intensification of agriculture over the past 4 decades, particularly the increased cultivation of orchards and olive trees, and also the associated development in the food processing industry, especially here the production of olive oil. These processes have been related to a rising use of groundwater in the region, and of course they have consequences for the water and land resources. So first of all, water levels in the 2 groundwater aquifers that we find in these regions are decreasing by an estimated rate of 1 and 2 meters per year respectively. In addition, the increased residues from agriculture and also from the food processing industry, especially the olive oil production, contributes to the contamination of surface and groundwater, and also the soil deterioration has increased in the region. So on top of this, the processes are likely to worsen against the backdrop of global climate change and the estimated decreasing and fluctuating annual precipitation regimes in the region. So what are now the successful ways to address these problems? One way, and this is what the project aims to do, is the adjustment from a linear to a circular economy. based on resource saving and cycle management. So that's the EWALMA project brings together very different stakeholders from Germany and Morocco, such as research institutes from natural sciences and also social sciences, but also governmental institutions and also private sector companies that are involved either in Germany on producing new products for the cycle management, or in the Moroccan region that form part of the olive oil industry. So together the consortium develops and tests technologies for the reuse of sewage water and sludge, and for the recycling of residuals of olive oil production, which is called the margine in Morocco. By means of these treatment processes, these residual products shall be made available again for irrigation, the treated water, on the one hand, but also be used for the improvement of soils, for example, by producing fertilizers out of the residues on the other hand. But also this, and this is then our job at BIC, the reuse of wastewater and agricultural residues brings not only opportunities, but also social and political challenges. And BIC aims to understand these in its sub-project Sustainable Transformation in Rural Morocco. So maybe you could go to the next slide. We argue that the application of these new technologies and services in the agriculture sector depends also on the adaptation capacity and innovation potentials of very different rural stakeholders and also their acceptance of new technologies. So by using qualitative research methods and remote sensing, we analyze first the current agricultural transformation processes and land use change, and second, the acceptance capacities, possibilities of different agricultural actors to integrate technical innovations into existing cultivation practices, and third, also the related conflict potentials. So what we can see, for example, is that while in the Fierce Magnus region, the family farming is still prevailing, new actors have emerged there since the early 2000s, especially agribusinesses and medium-sized investors. So these diverse actors, of course, they contribute in different ways to water-related problems, for example, the contamination of the groundwater or the overuse of the water, but they also have very different capacities to cope with them and to invest into new technologies. And based on this, they also evaluate or perceive new techniques in different ways. This is where we aim to look at, and because we argue that these differences unlock also potential conflict when introducing innovative technologies in cycle management. And they also then need to be addressed in these terms. Yes, so I think I would like to leave it here for now, and I'm happy to discuss any further questions if they arise. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Birgit. And you already see we're working in not only in many regions, but also on many different issues where water is linked to land, to agriculture, and to many other things. So now I would like to give the word to Dr. Daniel Tsegai. He works as Program Officer at the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, UNCCD. Dear Daniel, in your work, you have long-standing experience in bringing together researchers and policymakers, which is key to addressing water-related interlinkages. So from the background of your work on water scarcity in the context of drought extremes and the connections to land rehabilitation, which are successful ways to address this science policy nexus?
Thanks, Annabelle. Thank you, colleagues. I think you have the wrong slide. This is not the slide that I shared.
Yeah, that is my presentation.
Okay, great. Thank you for this very interesting question. Before I jump into your, but just first, the first one, please. Okay, great. I wanted to start with one saying that water is a connector, it's not a sector. We apply it to drought, we apply it to land, to many other sectors. So we knew that water is a connector. And I was involved in the UN water discussion during the SDGs. If water should have its own SDG, more visible probably, but water is also about everything. So by putting it only under one SDG, we are also trying to dilute and probably minimize the role of water. But in the end, water came up with this SDG 6 as its own, but water is also everywhere. So the UN Water, I don't know if you know them, it's an interagency mechanism that brings together a number of entities to work on water. More than 40 UN Water or UN organizations plus more than 60 partners meet every 6 months just to discuss water, to bring this into an issue. So yes, we are talking about water in the SDGs as a connector, but my angle of discussion for today, before I come to your question, Annabelle, is on land, because I come from the UNCCD and land is a flagship activity in the UNCCD, and we believe that land and water are interconnected. Every land use decision is a water use decision, but also every water use decision is a land decision. So we think that if land is healthy, it can be a natural storage for fresh water. If it's degraded, it's not. So yeah, land and water are interconnected. Why am I saying this, pushing into the land? Because our way of working on water is through the angle of land and mainly also on drought. So that's why we have come up with a new novel concept of drought smart land management. That's a concept that is now in the pipeline, and many activities in terms of land-based interventions in order to increase water usage, and a production system that contributes also to enhancing soil moisture holding capacity, water infiltration. There are a number of measures. It can, by controlling soil erosion, for example, soil water retention, integrated soil fertility management. By working on land, we are working on water. That is the hypothesis that we are talking about. So coming to this slide that I bring in, productive land brings about poverty eradication. That is what we know this SDG 1. Yes, it has a number of connections, and also about biodiversity and the climate, because when we talk about land rehabilitation, we are talking about increasing land productivity, vegetation cover, also increasing carbon sequestration under land, which means the land is becoming fertile, but at the same time, you are also contributing to climate change mitigation. Resilience to natural disasters and climate change. These are more or less related to a number of SDGs when it comes to droughts and floods and other disasters, and SDG 13 on climate also. Income generation, of course, rehabilitating your land will bring about more production, that means more income, and then the productive land can also support more livestock and better agriculture. Human security, we have a new initiative, or I couldn't call it now anymore new, it's a 3S initiative, sustainability, security, and stability initiative in Africa, where we talk about land-based jobs in order to reduce migration. So at the core, I think what we need is we need to go beyond concepts. We need to go beyond trying to convince someone that this land is at the center, climate is at the center, water is at the center. There should be some kind of evidence that this is the case. So for us at the UNCCD, land is at the core, and productive land brings almost everything. And what you have in terms of food and water security also for SDG 2 and 6. So it's about connecting them, and it's very important. Having said this, now going back to your question and the second slide. The second slide, to me, the question is not about connecting, but it's about how. So that's where the question comes from, the science policy interface. We need to bring in science to fit into policy, but also policy fits into science. And having said this, how can we create an incentive for the policymakers, for example, to listen to the scientists? What does it mean? They will be able to get evidence-based. For us at the UNCCD, we have a science policy interface where the scientists and policy analysts or policymakers come together every 6 months to discuss, to be fed, or whatever policies are made are knowledge-based, science-based, that they reflect the knowledge frontier. So the policymakers can benefit from having this evidence-based science or policy. The other thing is the policymakers can also provide back to the scientists by giving in some kind of real on-the-ground research question. I come from the academia, and we struggle to come up with a research question just to answer it. But that question, is it real? Is it something that policymakers are struggling to answer? So to become more relevant, I think you need to contact the policy. So the way we understand is we try to make sure that the policymakers should listen to science, but is that science based on the gaps in policy? So this is what we are trying to bring in together, making sure that science fits into policy, but also policy fits into science. So the policymakers could also definitely benefit from case studies, evidence that exists. We need to collect evidence. And the scientists, by way of providing evidence to the scientists, they can be more relevant, and they can be also useful and visible. We are now at the stage of establishing a collaborative center, for example, in order to on drought. And this is very important because all those research organizations have to listen to country parties, to the real on the ground research questions. So I will leave you with this thing. The key about networking, about making sure that the SDGs interact to each other is there. But how do we create the incentive? And we know that there should be some science. So the science policy interface is very important, that we need science on answering why it is important. We had a very interesting the first presenter about the interconnection between SDGs, but why is it important? What is the functionality and what does it mean to the decision makers? I can give you also a very simple example on drought. We keep always talking about going to policymakers, to countries. You should come together, drought as a connector. And when you talk to a country, they just say, oh, this is a livestock ministry, they are dealing with drought. But when drought strikes, it becomes a national issue. So deal with it. When it strikes, you have to deal it as a national issue. It's a national emergency, it's a national issue. Why don't you do it or work on it as a national issue before it strikes? So we need to really create that. We have now collected about 50 national drought policies. They are all saying that connection in the intersectoral coordination is a big problem, not only between SDGs, but within the country also, among sectors, just to work on one topic like water. It's a connector. You cannot just do anything without water. So I think we need science, and the science should listen to policy, and there should be more science policy interface. Thank you, and then probably we can come back to the question and answer session later.
Thank you so much, Daniel, for these insights. Very interesting. Now let's get last but certainly not least to the impact of climate change. Dr. Luna Barati is a principal researcher and project manager at the International Water Management Institute and at the Center for Development Research here in Bonn. So dear Luna, you have contributed to several projects addressing the water, energy, food, environment nexus in Africa and Asia. So how do climate change risks and impacts affect the interdependencies between water, energy, food, and the environment?
Okay, so thank you, Annabelle. Can you hear me well? Okay, so so I would like to start with the, basically I've written the title here, Water is the tease and cloth of climate change. So what we mean by this is water is the principal medium through which society feels climate-related stresses. And this is, basically the impact of climate change, the water community basically feels the impact of climate change is felt through water. And examples of the impact of climate change in water is intensification of the global water cycle. So there's evidence that the hydrological cycle or the water cycle is accelerating due to climate change. And this is leading to increasingly extreme events such as floods, droughts, and tropical storms. There is also increase in variability in seasonal patterns of rainfall, river discharge, onset and length of seasons, for example, and also heat waves and extreme cold spells. And there's also evidence that water quality is also being impacted due to increase in temperature and extreme precipitation events. So I've just decided to highlight some of the impacts of climate change that is felt through water. Now, the direct impacts of climate change on water, however, will be effectively multiplied via the effects on other sectors, like water, energy, food, the water, energy, food nexus. And so there's usually this domino effect, right? And so I've brought an example from, just an impact of climate change from the agricultural sector. So these two figures basically show from one of our projects in India, the current wheat environment and future wheat environment. And what we can see here is due to temperature, higher temperatures due to climate change, the area which is heat stressed is increasing. And that has direct impact on the economy. For example, it has been projected that in 2025, almost $20 billion $20 billion of losses will come due to decreased yield in wheat. And in 2050, it's almost $50 billion and up to 30% decrease in wheat yields because of higher temperatures. And so this basically shows this continuum of climate change impact on temperature affecting the agricultural sector, and that again impacting the economy and livelihoods. However, next slide, please. Okay. However, there's a flip side to this. So water is is how climate change impacts are felt in a lot of sectors, or it's a medium through which climate change impacts are felt. However, the world's community of water professionals also largely share the view that water is not just a risk, but is also the key to climate change adaptation and provides solutions for climate resilience. So water can be a risk, but it's also a means to arrive at solutions. And so I'll present one example from a project in Kenya. Here, investments in soil and water conservation, it reduced sediment loads, which meant additional 118 mega cubic meters of water storage in the Masinga Reservoir by 2080. So what you can see here in the first graph is business as usual. It's okay. So this is a watershed in Kenya, and which drains into a reservoir. And under business as usual, the sediment load is high. However, with watershed interventions that incorporate soil and water conservation techniques, sediment load was reduced. And that impacted not just the water angle of things, but also it had benefits to hydropower generation. So $600,000 US per year from increased power generation was projected. And of course, also you avoid interruptions of power generation. And also water supply benefits was up to $40,000 US per year because of the increase water. So basically water storage was increased in the reservoir, which is shown down here below. So this is also a very nice it shows this continuum of climate change, but how management of water and land resources can then make the system more resilient, which then impacts the energy sector. Due to increased water storage, irrigation could also be increased, so then also has benefits to the agricultural sector. Okay, so this is all I have for today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Luna, especially for the constructive and positive outlook on the interdependencies. So we would now like to open the floor and are very curious about your questions, which you can type in the Q&A section, either of the Zoom or of the Facebook, and which Linda Taft will kindly collect Linda, you're ready?
Yes, I'm here.
Questions, I guess.
So yes, I have already some questions which I can forward to you. Maybe, yes, first of all, there's a question which goes to Yvonne Walz, but maybe it's a question to all of you panelists. Could you please elaborate on the tools or on the methods that you are using to make sure that your research results reach the political decision makers? So, and what do you have direct access to the decision or to the political decision makers? And yeah, what are your methods and tools to reach them? Maybe Yvonne can start and then the others can follow.
Okay, I can start. Thank you so much for this question. I think this is a wonderful question. And I think after that, I can directly hand over to Marielle, as this is more or less her presentation, I think. It's all about transdisciplinary research, I would say. The tool is transdisciplinary research, that researchers start with listening to policymakers and understanding what is the demand. And then the trick we can make is co-design. And there's one project which we currently have, and Marielle already mentioned it, the Klimafree project. This is a project I presented actually in the second event of this lecture series already, so I didn't focus on it very much in this one, but this is one example where we had really a demand communicated from, let's say, the target region, a need for research, let's say, and at the same time a policy agenda set up. That means that an authority who needs knowledge to take decisions and to fulfill their mandate, for the example of transboundary water management, is actually set up. And now in this project we are together with this authority and the multi-sectoral stakeholders from 2 countries. We create a community and co-design this information system with them. That's actually the tool to go the journey together with the policymaker, let's say.
So do you moderate it already or triggered also already feedback also from my side? Yeah, actually that was the key topic of my little presentation. When I was figuring out that there's a huge gap between knowledge production and implementation, I figured out that this transdisciplinary research is really one way to meet this challenge or to reduce actually some shortcomings. And as Yvonne said, the transdisciplinary research is research together with stakeholders. Actually, you are formulating already the research question together with your partners, which is very much different from, let's say, participatory research or the research where you are, let's say, using stakeholders for getting information or for surveys and so on. Of course, that's also important, sure, but to make sure that the findings of the project or the research is really realized and then hopefully implemented in a sustainable way, you need ownership. And ownership you can only generate with a respectful cooperation. And for this, it's very important to have this, let's say, procedure or development of joint knowledge production and mutual exchange. And there are a couple of ways to do that. I presented some frameworks for that, or other tools for this. But I think the most important is to formulate the research question together, and then also to develop the way of doing the research together in the end, that the decision makers can profit from it. Of course, there's still some risk and difficulties. However, to have a transparent way, and as I'm a physical geographer and hydrologist, of course, we are working with models and hydrological models and hydrodynamic models and so on. But still, you can include people by setting up a model or setting up a decision support system. That was actually my doctoral thesis about my PhD thesis about the decision support systems, how they can be really coherent and applicable also for the end user, for the decision makers. Maybe I should stop here, but if you want to have some more information, I'm very happy to contribute.
Okay, thank you very much. I have a second one which is related to that, which goes maybe to every one of you. And please, I ask you for a very short answer because we are really late in time. How do you evaluate the success and impact of your transdisciplinary research? I think that's a very important question, and maybe the answer is not that easy. Who wants to answer?
Yeah, if it's okay, then I would like to start with this. I think it's important to not wait till the end of your project to look for impact. The impact, what the project might bring, needs to be thought of right at the beginning, at the design of the project. And so when you have your research question and your project outputs, you already start thinking about the impacts and how you can achieve these impacts. And so I feel it's very important to think of impacts right at the design of the research project.
If I may also add into that, I believe participation is ownership. So if you have a research, I think Mariela was also talking about getting the research question, designing the research question together with the stakeholders. But that doesn't still guarantee that it will be implemented. But they might have also problems in implementation. So there is a need of follow-up with them. What are the real challenges in implementing the policy recommendations that come out of this result? So you become part of the journey instead of just you recommend these are the research results, but how do they apply it? How do they apply it? And if there is any problem, it might be another generation of a research question for you to really make sure that this is effectively implemented. Thank you.
Okay, so maybe the two last questions. Daniel, you mentioned water as a connector between all role players in your presentation, but what if the different role players don't see the connection? Instead, each role player considers itself as the principal player. This could result in conflicts between the role players. So how do you see that point?
Yeah, I think this is a real life challenge, to be honest. That's why I'm going to give you the example of drought. You know, they just keep talking about it as if they are the stakeholders when it comes, but they have their components. So we have to make sure that we convince them that they need each other. Unless you create an incentive, there will be no policy making or no matter of rules and regulations will not enforce this kind of connection. So to me, still the challenge is how do we create the incentive to make sure that they work together. But a real example on drought is now it's becoming more a national issue, and we have to make sure that it's a high-level political authority is in charge of the drought. So this is a momentum as far as drought and water scarcity is concerned with many countries. We are advocating to make sure that, because if a line ministry is in charge of water or drought, then it cannot enforce into another line ministry. It can only urge or maybe advise, but if it's a high-level authority, so there must be some political discussion around it also. Avoid conflict.
Okay, thank you very much. And I think we still have time for one last question and a very short answer. So Yvonne, by doing risk assessment, do you consider time as a parameter in the overall evaluation of flood risks? And what is the time frame that is reasonable for prospective evaluation?
Yes, thanks for the question. Of course, we have to consider time. As I mentioned at the introduction of my short intervention, we have to deal with a very dynamic situation. We have climate change, we have global environmental change in all its dimensions, land use change, etc., all having an influence or an impact on flood risk, changing flood risk dynamics. So this is a very dynamic situation. For the example of our Klimafree project, where we want to establish a risk assessment in a transboundary catchment, we consider a kind of a baseline scenario where we look at the last 30 years and learn about what is the probability of hazard looking back at the last 30 years in certain regions, and how do climate change scenarios and for the year 2030, 50 and 70 change the dynamic of flooding. This is actually done by the working group of Professor Evers. And at the same time, we are looking at different land use change scenarios and how do they influence also the hydrological dynamic. And of course, we need to interpret how does this impact how could exposure and vulnerability change. We are actually still at the nursery level, let's say, in this research, because it's very, very difficult to model future exposure, to model future vulnerabilities. But this is actually where there's a huge research demand we see to really have a full understanding of future risk and not only focusing on the hazard elements. But this is more or less in a nutshell where we are right now.
Okay, thank you very much. There are some other questions, but maybe the questioners can ask them to the respective presenters via email. And I'd like to give over to Annabelle again. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Linda, for taking care of the questions. And I'm really sorry we couldn't address them all, but I think there's so many issues that we need to address again, and we will have many other lectures next year where we can go more into the details of different examples of these interdependencies. So we see that for these interdependencies, there are different sectors to consider that all need water. There are different levels of decision-making, of power relations and of interests, which obviously are a bit difficult to address. But nevertheless, I think the SDGs are a good framework to start thinking about it and to resolve concrete issues. So let me quickly invite you to our next event, which will be a water lecture by Professor Anna-Katharina Hornitsch, the director of the German Development Institute, on January 26. Ocean Governance for Sustainability. Why is the ocean of relevance to development research? You will get a separate invitation if you're registered, otherwise just contact us. You will find more information on our network and on the different events on DIE's website, and we will also have an own website of the Bonn Water Network next year. And then finally, let me thank the organizers and the audience and all the speakers, of course. Thanks a lot. Have a safe and especially healthy new year to you and your families, and have a nice evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Annabelle, and thanks all the panelists for representing the Bonn Water Network today, and thanks for this interesting session. Yeah, it's time to close the session and also the lecture series from our side, which was organized by TU Dresden, University of Bonn, and UNU-FLORES.
Thank you, Christina, and thanks everyone as well for today, and thanks for all the panelists who joined us throughout the 7 different sessions, who shared their presentations and discussions with us, and for all participants who attended and as well interacted with the panelists. And yeah, I wish you all as well safe and healthy times, and stay connected, everyone, with us and with the whole network that we shared. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.